إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. I welcome you back to our class on Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat Al-Naja, a level 1 Shafi'i fiqh course covering ibadat from a Shafi'i primer bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We commence from where we left off in our durus. Our course outcomes remain the same: an introduction to Islamic law, a first step into the legacy of the Shafi'i school, and learning the 5 pillars of Islam at a beginner or introductory level, insha'Allah ta'ala. In this lesson, we hope to cover the conditions of the opening takbir, the conditions of the fatiha, and the 7 conditions of prostration or sujood, among other minor topics, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون. The essence of what it means to be a believer is to be of the muttaqeen, to be of the Allah conscious. And the Allah conscious, as described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in the Quran, is الذين, those who يؤمنون, they believe, بالغيب, in the unseen, وَيُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةِ, and they establish the prayer, thus juxtaposing faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the unseen, with the prayer. The prayer is the ultimate representation of our physical submission and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then وَمِمَّا رَزَقَنَاهُمْ, and of that which we sustain them with, يُنْفِقُونَ, they spend, as a reference to the pinnacle of our financial ibadah, which is zakah. And the two are paired together in the Quran more than 80 times as an establishment, as a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that needs to be part of a believer's life. So with that note, we commence with the first segment of the course text for today's lesson, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, which is about fi shuruti takbiratul ihram. Fi shuruti, regarding the conditions of the takbirah, the takbir, the saying of Allahu Akbar, al-ihram, of ihram, of declaring haram. So literally, it means the conditions of the takbir, the statement of magnifying Allah's name, al-ihram, of the process of making oneself sacrosanct, or placing oneself in a sacred state for the sake of ibadah. So the word ihram comes from the word haram, harama, which means sacred. Now, most of us would be familiar with the term haram to mean that which is prohibited. That is a technical definition of the word haram. The maharim of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those things that Allah ta'ala had declared sacred or declared non-touchable, non-approachable. You don't go anywhere near that. So in relation to when we speak about the takbiratul ihram, it is a reference to the saying of Allahu Akbar, the opening declaration that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest, that specifically occurs at the beginning or the commencement of the prayer. This is not the takbiratul intiqal, or the takbir that is uttered at the time of moving from one posture to the other. So when we make salah, we say Allahu Akbar and we go into ruku, we say Allahu Akbar and we go into sujood and we come up from sujood, etc. Those are subsequent takbirat, or referred to individually as takbiratul intiqal, the takbirah of moving. What we are referring to here is specifically the takbir of starting the prayer, opening the prayer. So that is the takbiratul ihram. Why is it called ihram? And what's the relationship with this and the word haram? Because the moment we commence the prayer, we actually enter into a sacred state where certain actions that were previously permissible for us, such as moving, eating, drinking, and speaking, they all become haram once you say Allahu Akbar and you enter into the state of Salah, because if you were to do any of those things other than breaking the Salah, in a sense, if you do it deliberately, then it's sinful. The word ihram also features in our sacred law when we speak about Hajj. So in the bab of Hajj, when you enter into the state of ihram, in a similar way, certain things that were previously permissible for you, like intercourse with one's spouse, they become impermissible for a person, among other things as well. That applies to the state of ihram for Hajj and Umrah. But right now, again, we are speaking about the opening of the Salah, and we are speaking about the conditions of the Takbiratul Ihram. So what makes the declaration of Allahu Akbar valid? What are those conditions? And the conditions, they read as follows. Shurutu Takbiratul Ihrami, the conditions of the opening Ihram, Takbir, the opening declaration of the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being great, for the commencement of the Salah, 16, there are 16 in total. أن تقع حالة القيام في الفرض. The first condition is that it must occur during the position of standing in a fard prayer. Why? Because the fard prayer requires that one stands for the fard prayer, so naturally the Takbiratul Ihram must take place in that same posture, so it must be in the position of standing. To demonstrate how it does not fall into that position is if somebody decides they're going to sit and pray a fard prayer. Number one, the fard prayer would not be valid seated unless one has an excuse. And number two, the takbir would be in the sitting posture. And so for this reason, even when somebody is unable to sit, or rather when somebody is unable to stand extensively, it is recommended that they stand for the Takbiratul Ihram, and to the extent that they can stand, and then seat themselves down when the need arises. But be that as it may, so the Takbiratul Ihram must take place in the standing posture for a fard prayer. For a sunnah prayer, because it's valid to sit for a sunnah prayer, it would also be valid to have the opening Takbiratul Ihram in the seating position or the seated position as well. The next point is وَأَن تَكُونَ بِالْعَرَبِيَّةِ. The Takbiratul Ihram must be in the Arabic language, so it has to be Allahu Akbar or similar, which we'll get to, but it cannot be translated into any other language because that will not be considered valid. Then, وَأَن تَكُونَ بِاللَّفْظِ الْجَلَالَةِ, it has to be with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah. In strict terms, when we speak about grammatical analysis, we don't say Allah is in halatul raf or whatever the case may be. We say lafdhul jalala, the word of majesty, the word or the name of His Majesty subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the word lafdhul jalala. It refers to the name Allah. And then wabi lafdhi, the next condition, with the word akbaru. On the scale of tafdeel, in the Arabic language, the scale of af'ala, or rather af'alu, is on the scale of tafdeel or degrees of comparison. So if somebody says huwa akbaru minhu sinnan, he is akbaru minhu, he is bigger than him, he is older than him, sinnan, in age, that akbar there is in reference to sighatu tafdeel or the degrees of comparison. So it is necessary that the name Allah be present and that the sighatu tafdeel, the degree of comparison of af'alu, must be utilized for the word akbar. وَالتَّرْتِيبُ بَيْنَ اللَّفْظَيْنِ, there must be sequence between the two words. So first the word lafdhul jalal, first the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the declaration that He is the greatest, akbar. Literally, by the way, af'alu means more than. So akbaru means greater than. And grammatically speaking, there should be something to which it is compared that is mentioned afterwards. So if you say ana akbaru minka sinnan, I'm older than you, the word sinnan defines what I'm older than you in, or what I'm bigger than you in. So in the case of Allahu Akbar, then if you consider this as a very technical grammatical aspect, it is Allah is greater than, and not Allah is the greatest, right? Allah is greater than. But there's nothing mentioned afterwards, because no matter what you place after that, it's still true. Allah is greater than anything and everything. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it open-ended for us, because no matter what we are thinking, no matter what we are, where our hearts are, Allah is greater than that. And therefore when we translate it, we generally translate it as Allah is the greatest, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Then وَالتَّرْتِيبُ بَيْنَ اللَّفْظَيْنِ, so there has to be sequence, first the mention of the name of Allah, and then Allahu Akbar. Then وَأَلَّا يَمُدَّ هَمْزَةَ الْجَلَالَةِ, one should not extend the hamza of al-jalala, of the name of Allah. So one should not say Allahu Akbar, right? So that would be an extension, a mad, where a mad is not appropriate. Then وَعَدَمُ مَدِّ بَاءِ أَكْبَرِ, there should not be an extension of the ba of the word akbar. So one should not say Allah, or rather Allahu Akbar, right? That would be incorrect as well. وَأَلَّا يَمُدَّ هَمْزَةَ الْجَلَالَةِ وَعَدَمُ مَدِّ باء of akbar. وَأَلَّا يُشَدِّدَ الْبَاء, one should not have any shadda on the ba. One should not say Allahu Akbar, right? There should be no shadda on the ba. وَأَلَّا يَزِيدَ وَاوًا سَاكِنَةً, one should not increase the waw sakina. Allahu Akbar. أو متحرقة بين الكلمتين Allahu Akbar, right? Those are both incorrect. وَأَلَّا يَزِيدَ وَاوًا قَبْلَ الْجَلَالَةِ, one should not have an additional waw before the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu Akbar, right? وَأَلَّا يَقِفَ بَيْنَ كَلِمَتَيِ التَّكْبِيرِ, one should not stop, right? يَقِفَ, one should not stop. بَيْنَ كَلِمَتَيِ التَّكْبِيرِ, between the two words Allah and Akbar. There should not be Allah Akbar, okay? وَقْفَةً طَوِيلَةً, it should not be a long pause. وَلَا قَصِيرَةً, nor should it be a short pause. There should be no pause in between. Allahu Akbar. وَأَن يُسْمِعَ نَفْسَهُ جَمِيعَ حُرُوفِهَا, and like in all other forms of necessary recitation in the salah, one must recite it loud enough to allow oneself to hear under normal circumstances. So we've explained this before, but in case you've missed it, for the Shafi'i school, an obligatory recitation or a valid recitation, like the recitation of the Takbiratul Ihram, Surah al-Fatiha, or even reciting Quran, whether inside or outside of Salah, for your recitation to be considered tilawa in the technical sense of the word, to be qualified as tilawa or recitation, it is necessary to recite loud enough or audible enough so that one could hear oneself under normal listening circumstances. That means you have an average hearing ability, and the circumstances of your acoustics, whether that be external noise or just the acoustics of the place you are in, is a usual circumstance. So you're not in some huge hall where everything reverberates and you can't hear yourself, nor are you in such a noisy environment that you would have to speak extra loud to hear yourself. Those would be unusual circumstances. But the usual circumstance is that if you were to speak in a whisper where there's silence, you'd be able to hear yourself. That would be considered validly loud enough, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And this, again, it applies to all recitation from the Shafi'i perspective. وَدُخُولُ الْوَقْتِ فِي الْمُؤَقَّتِ, there must also be the occurrence of the Takbiratul Ihram within the time that the prayer has become valid in. So you cannot start or commence a salah even a moment before the waqt of that salah had actually entered. So for example, if Fajr is at 6 a.m. and you make your Takbiratul Ihram at 5:59, right? That would be incorrect. But also you have to consider the discussions that we had when we spoke about the times of the salah and how it is calculated to get a full appreciation of what I just mentioned there. Then we proceed to the next condition, وَإِيقَاعُهَا حَالَ الْإِسْتِقْبَالِ. it must occur while one is facing the Qibla. You cannot have the Takbiratul Ihram while you're facing in a different direction and then turn to the Qibla. It must be while facing the Qibla. The same thing can be said about the standing aspect, which was mentioned quite early on. It must take place while standing. So for the person who's perhaps seated and then they are in the process of standing and then they make the Takbiratul Ihram in the process as opposed to while they are already standing, that would also be deficient. And then وَأَلَّا يُخِلَّ بِحَرْفٍ مِّنْ حُرُوفِهَا. One should not omit any of its letters. There should be no discrepancy in your recitation that one or two letters is hidden or unclear or not mentioned at all. وتأخير تكبيرة المأموم عن تكبيرة الإمام. There must be a slight delay between the opening takbir of the follower to that of the Imam. So if the Imam says Allahu Akbar, then the follower commences with Allahu Akbar, as opposed to preceding the Imam, which would be invalid, or having the recitation at the same time coincidental with the Imam. That would also not be optimum. One should have the Takbiratul Ihram after the Takbiratul Ihram of the Imam in order for your following of that Imam and your prayer to be valid, and Allah knows best. So that was the Arabic text. Now we go into the translation. If we've left anything out, we'll explain it again. And then, of course, we take it from there, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So the conditions of Takbiratul Ihram are 16. Number 1, that it is pronounced while standing in the fard prayer. Number 2, that it is in Arabic. Number 3, that it be with the word Allahu. Number 4, that it be with the word Akbar. Number 5, the sequence between these words are Allahu Akbar, and it must be in that sequence. Number 6, one should not lengthen the Hamza of the word Allah as in Allah. And then number 7, not to lengthen the letter of the Ba of Akbar. It should not be Akbar. Number 8, not to double the letter of Ba, right? It should not have a shadda there on. Number 9, not to add a waw sakin or mutaharrik between these two words, as we've explained before. Number 10, not to add a waw before the word Allah, as if to say Wallahu Akbar. Number 11, not to pause for a long or short while between these two words. Number 12, to hear oneself uttering its entire letters or all of the letters. Number 13, the entering of the time of the salah for the Takbiratul Ihram would not be valid before that. And number 14, for it to occur while facing the Qibla. Number 15, not to change even a single letter or to omit a letter. Number 16, to delay the takbir of the ma'moom, the follower, till after the takbir of the imam, the leader. Some of the footnotes here just explains what we've explained before over there, so that should cover that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. What you have here now is the course notes for the students who are registered for this course from Nailur Raja, which of course explains exactly what has been explained with a little bit more detail, or actually I should say with a lot more detail. For those of you who want to read a bit deeper into the issue or want to understand something in a different perspective or in a different sense of depth, so you may read these notes at your own leisure, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We provide it in the slides because the slides form the course notes for the students who are registered for the course. Now we proceed over to the next section, which is about the conditions, the shurut of the Fatiha. As we know, the Fatiha is a necessary recitation in the Salah. We've dealt with this in a previous lesson. This is based on the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he states, La salata illa bi fatihatil kitab. There is no prayer, and the Shafi's interpretation of this is that there is no valid prayer illa bi fatihatil kitab, except to the recitation of Suratul Fatiha. So what are the conditions for the recitation of Suratul Fatiha to be considered valid? Let's have a look at that now, inshaAllah ta'ala. Fi shurutil Fatihati, regarding the conditions of the Fatiha. Shurutul Fatihati asharatun. The conditions of the Fatiha are 10. Let's read through them, inshaAllah. at-tartibu, there has to be a sequence. In other words, the first verse must be read first, then the second, then the third, till the end. Wal-muwalatu, there has to be succession between the verses so as to not create a abnormally long pause between the verses, but one verse must follow up from the other. So for example, one would recite Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. So the pauses between the verses are basically moderate or normal pauses, as opposed to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Those would be a bit too long based on al-muwalat. There must be quick succession after each verse. وَمُرَاعَةُ حُرُوفِهَا, one must observe all of the letters of the Fatiha. So each letter of the Quran must be given its haqq. That consists of having the proper makharij, in other words, pronunciation of the letter, and the application of the rules of tajweed, essentially. Those two aspects collectively would ensure the proper recitation of its letters. So one cannot omit any letter of the Fatiha. Then, وَمُرَاعَةُ, observation of tashdidatiha, the shaddas within the Fatiha. So wherever there's a shadda, the shadda must be recited appropriately. وَأَلَّا يَسْكُتَ sakta, there must be no silence, saktatan tawilatan, a long silence, wala qasiratan, nor a short silence, yaqsidu biha, with which the reciter intends qat' al-qira'ati, the severing of the recitation. So one should not go into a silence with the intention of cutting the recitation, right? It shouldn't be a long silence nor a short silence if it is accompanied with that intention. وَقِرَاءَةُ كُلِّ آيَاتِهَا, the recitation of each one of its verses. وَمِنْهَا, and among the verses, is the al-basmalatu, the recitation of Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Now, of course, the recitation of the basmala is a matter upon which the scholars had differed. So in the four madhahib, we find different approaches to the basmala. For the Shafi'i school, it considers the basmala as an intrinsic part of every surah, the beginning of every surah, except for Surah At-Tawbah. So for the Shafi'i school, the basmala is recited out loud as a condition of the Fatiha. For other schools of thought, the Hanbali school recites it softly, the Hanafi school recites it softly. The Maliki school, they don't recite the basmala in this sense. So there are different approaches. The scholars had differed over how one should approach the basmala when it comes to the recitation of the Quran and the Fatiha in the prayer. وَعَدَمُ اللَّحْنِ الْمُخِلِّ بِالْمَعْنَى, there should be no mistake. عَدَمُ اللَّحْن means a mistake in pronunciation or in recitation. Such a mistake that al-mukhil, that would break or that would change bil-ma'na, the meaning. Now, of course, such mistakes can only be identified by one who understands the sciences of the Quran and the Arabic language. For somebody who does not understand the Arabic language and the sciences of the Quran, for the very least, they must ensure that the recitation is valid by reciting to somebody who is qualified to assess the recitation as such. There are two types of recitation mistakes in terms of sacred law. There's lahan khafi and there's lahan jali. There's a minor mistake, which is, for example, to lengthen a letter slightly longer than it should, to slightly mispronounce a letter. And then there's lahan jali, a major mistake, where a letter is substituted for another letter or is not pronounced correctly to such an extent that it sounds like a different letter, thus possibly changing the meaning. And based on what it is that we are reciting exactly, this could end up being quite a big mistake in terms of the meaning. Sometimes just changing a haraka like and right, can result in serious errors. Of course, Allah knows the hearts of the believers. So if somebody makes an innocent mistake then they will not be held accountable for that. But what they are held accountable for is the absence of sincere pursuit of rectification of the mistakes, or sincere pursuit of knowledge that they can rely on. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So this should be a lesson for all of us to ensure that we, from time to time, recite the Fatiha to somebody who can assist us with rectifying our recitation, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, and we can always improve in this respect. وعدم اللحن المخل بالمعنى, we mentioned that. وأن تكون حالة القيام, the entire Fatiha must take place in the standing position for a fard prayer. He says, fil fardi, for a fard prayer, again considering the fact that the standing is a condition of the fard prayer and it is not a condition of the sunnah prayer, so that would not apply. وَأَيُّسْمِعَ نَفْسَهُ الْقِرَاءَةَ, as we said before, in terms of audibility, how loud should one recite? One should be able to hear oneself under normal circumstances with the recitation, with normal hearing ability, and Allah knows best. وَأَلَّا يَتَخَلَّلَهَا ذِكْرٌ أَجْنَبِيٌّ, they should not interfere or intermingle or come in between the recitation of the Fatiha, a dhikr, a mentioning, ajnabiyun, that does not belong there. Anything that is foreign, anything that is not, anything that's not part of the Fatiha should not come in between its recitation at all. So we'll go through that again with the translation, and if there's anything that we need to add onto our explanation, we'll do so bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So the conditions of Surah Al-Fatiha are 10. Number 1, the sequence. Number 2, continuity. Number 3, to perfect the pronunciation of its letters. Number 4, to perfect its tashdid or shadda. Number 5, not to pause for a long time or short while with the intention of terminating the recitation. Number 6, reciting all of its verses, including the basmala. Number 7, not to commit a mistake that alters the meaning. Number 8, to recite it while standing in the fard salah. Number 9, to hear one's own recitation with the conditions that we spoke about previously. And number 10, no foreign dhikr or recitation should be recited in between the Fatiha. These are footnotes that go along with the previous section, so we'll just go through this briefly. The Fatiha is not considered to be interrupted if one replies to the Ameen of the Imam. So if one is busy reciting one's own Fatiha, possibly because you took the approach of reciting a verse after the Imam completes the verse. So the Imam says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and then silently to oneself one says Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and you carry on throughout. What may then happen is the Imam says غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Now you're busy reciting the previous verse, however you cut your recitation to say Ameen, and then you continue with your recitation to conclude it. That would be valid, and it would not be considered an interruption in one's recitation because there's a valid reason for that. So if one replies to the Ameen of the Imam, reminding him of the right ayah or verse when he errs, so if one hears the Imam recite incorrectly or perhaps loses his spot in the recitation, if you then interrupt your own recitation to rectify the Imam, that would not invalidate your Fatiha. And then if the Imam prostrates with, or rather if he prostrates with the Imam in a sajda to tilawa, a recitation prostration, forgetfully falls silent or absent-mindedly adds some dhikr in it. In all of these instances, one's Fatiha is not considered to be interrupted. And then footnote number 33, if one omits one of the Fatiha's letters, fails to double a letter that should be doubled, or in other words, one omits the shadda where it should have been added, or substitutes a wrong letter for the right one, it invalidates one's recital of that particular word, and one must recite that word again. This will not invalidate one's salah unless it changes the meaning and was done deliberately. Mistakes in a haraka, a short vowel, a, I, or u, are not harmful as long as they do not alter the meaning. And as I said previously, there are certain instances in which it would alter the meaning, but only somebody who is versed in the Arabic language would be able to pick that up. So if you don't know, then at least make sure that your recitation is sound. Number 34, its entire letters should be recited while standing, or I would rephrase that and say all of its letters should be recited while standing. Once again, as is our habit, we have the notes from Nailul Raja, a contemporary sharh on Safinat Al-Naja for your reading bi'idhnillahi ta'ala and additional information. Then we proceed to the next section, which is a bit of an interesting section. It's unique. I haven't really seen this type of detail in a primer. When it comes to the recitation of the Fatiha, we generally focus on the rules pertaining to it, but not the rules of recitation. However, in this primer, Imam al-Hadrami has given extensive detail as to making sure that the recitation itself is sound and in order. So he gives us this section explaining where the shaddas of the Fatiha are. It does not actually require translation, but rather identification. So we say the word and then you have to identify where exactly the shadda is. And the shadda is essentially the doubling of a letter, as you'll see in a moment. And the objective here is to ensure that when we recite the Fatiha, that we actually recite the shadda as well and not omit it or say it as a single letter, which would be incorrect also. So let's go through that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala and you can follow along on the notes. So فصل في تشديدات الفاتحة تشديدات الفاتحة أربع عشرة. The emphatic letters or the shaddas of the Fatiha are 14. Bismillah, in the phrase Bismillah, now he gives you exactly where that occurs. فوق اللام, on top of the lam. Bismillahi, right, in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, he's going to mention the verse and then point out where the shaddas are, and basically you just need to make sure that you observe the recitation thereof. Ar-Rahmani, on the Ra. Ar-Rahimi, on the Ra. Alhamdulillahi, the middle lam of the name of Allah. فوق اللام الجلالة. Rabbil Alameen, on the Ba. Ar-Rahman, on the Ra. Ar-Rahim, on the Ra. Maliki Yawmiddin, on the Dal. Iyaka na'budu, on the Ya. Wa iyaka nasta'een, on the Ya. Again. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim, on the Sad. Sirata al-ladhina, on the Lam. أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين, on the Dad as well as the Lam, right? The Dad of Dalin as well as the Lam of Ad-Dalin. So those are the shaddas of the Fatiha that we need to observe when we recite the Fatiha bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Again, there are some notes from Nailul Raja. Doesn't add much, but they are there for your reference, inshallah. We then proceed on to the next section, which speaks about Faslun fi Raf'il Yadayn, the chapter on raising the hands, right? Raising the hands inda takbiri, when commencing the salah. Now, once again, we are speaking specifically about the Raf'ul Yadayn at the time of saying Allahu Akbar to start the prayer. In the Shafi'i school, it's considered sunnah to make raf'ul yadayn, to raise the hands, at the various postures of moving as well, a point in which there's a difference of opinion between the Shafi'i and the Hanafi schools. But be that as it may, here we are speaking about the opening of the salah itself. So he says, yusannu, it is considered sunnah, raf'ul yadayni, to raise the two hands, fi, in arba'ati, 4 mawadi', in 4 places, meaning 4 different places in the salah. So the first one, which is our focus now, عند تكبيرة الإحرام, at the time of the opening takbir, وعند الركوع, at the time of going into ruku. So one is in salah and reciting, you end off with your surah, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, Allahu Akbar. So there again one would have it would be sunnah to raise the hands to go into ruku'. So that means that is a reference to that point here, وَعِنْدَ الرُّكُوعِ. The next point, وعند الاعتدال, when coming up from ruku. So one is bowed down like that. So you say سمع الله لمن حمده, and again it's sunnah to raise one's hands like that, according to the Shafi'i school, not according to the Hanafi school. وعند القيام من التشهد الأول, as well as at the time of standing up from after your first tashahhud. So in a salah, wherein there are two sittings for the tashahhud, this would be for Dhuhr, for Asr, for Maghrib, and for Isha. Of course, Fajr only has one tashahhud, which is the final tashahhud, so it's not applicable there. If your salah has two tashahhuds, the first one is considered a sunnah, an emphasized sunnah, and the second, the final one, is called the obligatory one. Now, when you rise up from the first tashahhud and you go back into the standing position, so after you've sat and you said at-tahiyyatu al-mubarakatu as-salawatu at-tayyibatu lillah till the end of where you need to recite for this the first tashahhud, then you then rise up and you say Allahu Akbar. At the time of rising up there, it is sunnah to also raise the hands and get back into the salah in that way, or rather get back into the qiyam and the recitation of the Fatiha in that way. As opposed to after the first raka'ah, wherein there's no tashahhud, and after the third raka'ah of a 4 raka'at prayer, wherein there's also no tashahhud. There, you don't raise the hands when coming up from the sajda. You just come up into the standing position and you place your hands where they need to be, and you proceed with the recitation of the Fatiha in that way. So it is only sunnah to raise the hands, raf'ul yadayn, at these 4 places. The first place is at the time of the takbiratul ihram, Allahu Akbar, to start your salah. Then when going into ruku, Allahu Akbar, to go into ruku. Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, Subhan Rabbiyal Azim, Subhan Rabbiyal Azim. Sami'a Allahu liman hamida. Again, to raise the hands in the same way, at the same place, in the same posture as we mentioned at the beginning of this course. And then when rising from the first tashahhud, where applicable, one would say also Allahu Akbar and raise the hands accordingly, and Allah knows best. So to emphasize this once again, let's look at the translation. It says, it is sunnah to raise the hands in 4 places. Number 1, during the takbiratul ihram. It is from the sunan hay'ah, meaning it is what we call, sometimes we translate this as a regular sunnah, but meaning it is not an integral nor an emphasized sunnah. The wisdom being to show respect and reverence to Allah Azza wa Jal. And then number 37, when going into ruku, or rather that was number 35. So number 36 is to begin raising the hands at the beginning of the takbir and put them down at the end of the takbir, means that raising of the hands must be simultaneous with the takbir from the beginning till the end. Now we've mentioned this point before, but when you start the prayer, right, when you're standing and you're reading the iqamah, or the iqamah is being read, we generally stand with our hands to our sides and we look down at the place of sajda. And at the time of the Imam saying of Allahu Akbar, we are listening to his Allahu Akbar, and the moment he completes, in other words, the moment he reaches the ra of Allahu Akbar, at that point, we now start our prayer by also saying Allahu Akbar with our hands by our sides. And the moment we start with Allahu Akbar, then we also started the movement of the hands. And the moment we ended the declaration of Allahu Akbar, we end off with the letter Ra. So the moment we reach the Ra, then the hands are settled where they should be. As opposed to saying Allahu Akbar, or as opposed to first doing the action, Allahu Akbar, the movement and the recitation should ideally be simultaneous. So as we start Allahu Akbar, so there my motion and my words were coincidental, they happened at the same time. So that's the ideal manner of doing it. And we've mentioned this before, so that was a bit of a revision. Footnote number 37, it says when going into ruku'. So number 37 says a person starts raising his hands at the beginning of the takbir and prolongs the takbir until he places his hands upon his knees, fingers spread apart, and backbone and head are straight. So that's a description of the ruku'. But what's important here is to note that the same thing that applied at the Takbiratul Ihram in terms of moving and speaking with the Allahu Akbar simultaneously also applies when moving into ruku, or when coming up from ruku, or when going into sajda, etc. Your dhikr that you pronounce out loud should ideally coincide with the movement itself, which would also necessitate that for as long as we move, we are also in a state of dhikrullah. And this helps in terms of followers and the imam. So if the imam recites his takbirs, as long as he moves, then without having to look at the imam, the followers can easily follow the motion of the imam. So in case they lose track of which raka'ah they are in, just by the length of his recitation, the follower would know exactly what to do. Tamam. And then, so that was footnote number 37. Footnote number 38 speaks about when standing up from the first tashahhud, rather when straightening up from i'tidal, that's footnote number 38, a person begins raising his hands with the raising of the head and the takbir. When he straightens, he lowers his hands, again just for accompaniment, and Allah knows best. Thereafter we have the segment of text from Nailur Raja once again, and that leads us to the end of that section, and we commence with the next section, which is about the conditions of the prostration, the conditions of the sujood. So in the text, Faslun fi shuruti sujudi, a chapter regarding the conditions of the sujood. Shurutu sujudi sab'atun. The conditions of the sajda or the prostration are 7. Ay yasjuda ala sab'ati a'da'in. To make sajda on 7 limbs. That's the first one. The 7 limbs of sajda are the bottom of the palms, it's the forehead. The nose is not a requirement in the Shafi'i school, but it is in the Hanafi school. So generally, the Shafi'i scholars recommend that you, khurujan min al-khilaf, to stay out of the domain of differences, to also have the nose prostrate on the ground as well as part of the forehead in terms of how you count it. So it's the bottom of the palms, the forehead, then the knees, the 2 knees, and the bottoms of the toes. So if you imagine this to be the foot, then the foot goes like that in sajda, and the bottoms of the toes faces the qibla, the toes faces the qibla, and the bottoms of the toes are on the ground. So that would make up your 7. It's the 2 feet, the 2 knees, the 2 palms, and the forehead, and to include the nose would be recommended as well. So those are the 7 limbs of prostration, and Allah knows best. وَأَن تَكُونَ, and that it should be جَبْهَتُهُ, his forehead should be makshufatan, it should be uncovered. Some scholars disagree with this view, but this is the preferred view, that if you have the ability to uncover your forehead, that you should uncover it. So if you have perhaps a hat that, sort of pressed down onto the forehead, that covers the forehead, so that you're not prostrating on the ground, but rather you're prostrating with a barrier between yourself and the ground that moves with you, then that would be insufficient based on this view here. Or if you have a turban on, for example, and you prostrate onto the turban, or you have a scarf like this around your neck and you prostrate onto the scarf, that would be considered covered and not uncovered. Then if you look at the sharh in this respect, let's go to it inshaAllah. If one is wearing, footnote number 40 says, if one is wearing a bandage over the forehead because of an injury, sajda may be made on the bandage without the need of repeating it, with the condition that the bandage was put on while one was in the state of purity. That's a strict Shafi'i view. There are alternatives that are much easier than this, but we'll mention that anyways, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then looking at Nailur Raja, he mentions here, وأن تكون جبهته مكشوفة. الجبهة ما بين الددغين طولا وما بين شعر الرأس وشعر الحاجبين عرضا وأما جانبهما. Okay, he's just mentioning the extent of the forehead here, but the point that I wanted to get to was No. So he doesn't mention the other opinions that exist in this regard. But the Muhashshun, the later commenters of the Shafi'i school, they seem to be strict in terms of what needs to be uncovered. So they, for example, mention here that the head must be uncovered along with the hands and the feet, right? The hands and the feet. And the idea being that these limbs must be on the ground. But others have differed in this respect and said that these don't need to be uncovered in a strict sense of having nothing. So gloves and so forth is not technically a problem. But at this level, the best thing to do is actually the most precautious, which is exactly what is being stated here. To not have these limbs, the hands and the forehead, to not have them covered during the prayer where possible, and Allah knows best. Then وَالتَّحَامُلْ بِالرَّأْسِ وَالتَّحَامُلْ بِالرَّأْسِ, and to carry the head on the ground. وَالتَّحَامُلُ بِالرَّأْسِهِ, to carry the head on the ground. In other words, the weight of the ground must support, the ground must support the weight of the head. If I were to make sajda on clay, for example, there should be an imprint of my forehead on the clay, as opposed to placing my forehead on the ground so it touches, but I'm actually keeping the weight of my head off that point, and I'm supporting the weight of my head with my hands, as in a push-up, for example. So that would not be appropriate. One needs to actually have the ground carry the weight of one's head. وَعَدَمُ الْهُوِيِّ لِغَيْرِهِ, and to not go into sajda for any other reason, right? To not go into sajda for any other reason. وَأَلَّا يَسْجُدَ عَلَى شَيْءٍ يَتَحَرَّكُ بِحَرَكَتِهِ, to not make sajda on anything that moves when you move. So if this scarf, for example, falls onto the ground when I make sajda, and then I place my head onto the scarf, that is considered not a valid sajda because it does not meet this condition. You should not be prostrating on anything that moves with your movement. And then finally, وَارْتِفَاعُ أَسَافِلِهِ عَلَى أَعَالِيهِ. This is somewhat of a natural occurring thing, but one's bottom should be higher than one's head in the position of sajda. So to keep the bottom, the backside up, and the head to be onto the ground. It's something that happens naturally if you fulfilled everything else. But as a note here, just make sure that that is the case. And then finally, وَالطُّمَأْنِينَةُ فِيهِ, to have a moment of pause, to be in a state that is completely still during that particular posture. That is a condition as well. Tamam. We continue bi'idhnillahi ta'ala with the same piece in translation. The conditions of sajda are 7. Number 1, to prostrate upon the 7 limbs. He says the 7 limbs are, as I mentioned, but then the sunnah is to also place the nose on the ground. In the Hanafi school, it is considered a necessity. You have to place the nose on the ground. And if you don't in the Shafi'i school, your salah is still valid. Number 2, the forehead should be exposed as opposed to being covered. Number 40 says if one is wearing a bandage, we've read that one already. Number 3, to make sajda by resting on the head. The weight of the head should be supported by the ground. Number 41, the weight of the head and neck should be applied to the place of sajda so that the forehead is firmly stationed on the ground. Number 4, not to intend anything but sajda. I find this point an interesting one because initially you might think that there's no other reason why somebody in salah would go into sajda except for sajda. But I actually experienced 1 or 2 occasions where praying at the Haramain, there were locusts at the time. You know, from time to time they have these swarms of locusts coming through, and then the locusts would basically fly into people. Just in terms of their normal flight, so they'd fly into people. And when people are in salah and the locust comes at you, it's like a speeding bullet coming at you, and you can see it because it's quite big. So the natural instinct, if one is witness to this happening, the natural instinct is to move out of the way. And if you can manage to do that without breaking the salah, then fine. But if you can't, then it creates a problem. So what I've seen some people do is they see this locust coming, and then they move into the next posture of the salah to get out of the way. So somebody is sitting, for example, they're sitting between the two sajdas, and then the locust is coming for their head, so they go down into the second sajda. But going down into the second sajda should be only to go into sajda, not to dodge a locust or an insect or anything else. So that is essentially what this point is making here, is that you should only be going down into the sajda or into any posture of the salah for the sake of going into that posture, as opposed to any other reason, right? And that would be a condition of the sajda. If it so happens that you accidentally went into a posture for an ulterior motive, then you would have to return to the previous posture and go back into that posture with the exclusive purpose of the act of ibadah, and Allah knows best. Then we said number 5, not to prostrate on something that moves with one's own movement. A point that I've seen also is that some people, they pray on a surface like a prayer mat or on a scarf or something of the sort when they enter into a masjid or when they're praying elsewhere, with the idea that the masjid's carpets may have a lot of dust therein, and they may be very prone to allergies and the like. So if that is the case, a simple solution is to take off the scarf or to take off whatever it is that you are making sajda on, and place that on the ground and make your salah accordingly. But what I have also noticed is that some male folk wearing a shawl would keep the shawl on their person, and as they go into sajda, they cast the shawl down and then they prostrate onto the shawl. That isn't valid because it does not meet the conditions as mentioned here. Number 6 was that the rear must be higher than the front, higher than the head. Again, this is something that happens naturally if you prostrate in the way that is described here. And then number 7, to remain motionless for a moment while prostrating. The tuma'nina is a condition in practically every in every posture of the prayer. And the 7 limbs of prostration, as mentioned here, are the forehead, both palms, both knees, and the portion under the toes of each foot. Here you have the sharh from Nailur Raja being mentioned again, and that leads us to our lesson summary. So where are we now? We've moved all the way from the framework of fiqh, from the 3 pillars of what Islam is all about, right? Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. We focused in on Islam, specifically the 5 pillars of Islam. We've looked at the precondition to the prayer, which is purification, and we've covered the basics of purification. We then went into the concept of the prayer itself, starting from the very beginning, looking at the integrals, etc. of the prayer. And now we are looking at the commencement of the prayer. So the takbiratul ihram, the recitation of the fatiha, the conditions of each posture. And so we will proceed until we complete the prayer, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, after which, of course, we mention the sunan and the like. What have we learned in this lesson specifically? We've learned about the conditions of the opening takbir, we've learned about the conditions of the fatiha, and we've learned about the 7 conditions of prostration, among other points that appeared in between. I leave you with a question, and the question is, when should the takbir of the ma'moom, the follower, occur in relation to the takbir of the imam? Must it be before the imam, during the imam's takbir, or after the imam's takbir? By now you should be able to answer this question, along with the other questions that we have prepared for you in the multiple choice quiz that comes as a course add-on for those who are registered for this course. So if you are not yet registered for Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat Al-Naja, you can find the description of the course registration in the description of the video here as you see it, or you can just visit seekersguidance.org. Registration details available on the screen at the moment to register for Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat Al-Naja. And therein you will find the videos of the course, the course notes, as well as the multiple choice quizzes to ensure that you've understood the primary concepts of each lesson before moving on to the next lesson. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Barakallahu li wa lakum, jazakumullah khairan for joining us for this lesson. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد سبحان الله وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.